When you open up a role, there's a lot of people throwing their hats in the ring, and to get that pared down to say a handful of candidates that are worth taking the time to really, go through that interview process, it's so really valuable to have a recruiter that understands that, whole holistic picture of what you're looking for.
Welcome back to Talent Hunters, powered by MRI Network, where each week we talk with the world's top talent strategists and executive recruiters. If you want to build talented teams that drive your company to big goals and big growth, then this podcast is for you. And now, let's join the conversation with today's episode of Talent Hunters.
This is Vince Holt with the Talent Hunters. Today we have an exciting new opportunity on Talent Hunters with Nick Fassino, managing partner of the Fassino Group, located in Houston, Texas, as well as one of his valued clients, Laurie Haley, who is a very accomplished executive sales leader in the high-tech world as well as the cybersecurity world. Nick's office focuses in the cybersecurity world and has experienced incredible success in the few years that he's been here. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Vince.
Nick, please tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to where you are today with the Fassino Group.
Sure. We've been in business now for 6 years. I was in sales and sales leadership and actually in the travel industry for about 20 years. Decided we wanted to start our own company. Started looking at a lot of different things. We looked at restaurants and all kinds of different models and just landed on recruiting. It's something that I had done my whole life in building sales teams. And we started doing research on what is the hardest positions to hire for in the US, and everything was coming up cybersecurity. So we just said, hey, we're going to be cybersecurity recruiters. And it was kind of a baptism by fire. We started calling companies and learning about the industry and calling candidates and learning about the industry. And over time, we're able to develop some expertise. And like I said, 6 years later, it's been great.
Oh, this is exciting. Nick, would you please introduce us to Laurie and lead us into how your relationship started with her?
Sure. So Laurie has been in the cybersecurity industry for 25 years. She has led teams. I've known people she has reported to. I've known her peers. I've known those that have reported to her. I can say, as someone that deals with leaders in the industry on a regular basis, on a daily basis, Laurie is someone that assembles great teams. She supports her teams while driving results. She builds great partnerships in the industry. She's led the Technology Alliance program at Veracode. She led the worldwide sales team at Qualys, where we met. She managed the vulnerability program for CVS. These are just a few of the things she's done. We have been friends. She's been a client of mine for 5 years. Like I said, we met at Qualys and we helped to build out her sales team there, and have kept in touch ever since. So I like I said, I consider Laurie a great person in the industry as well as a great friend.
Welcome, Laurie.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Now, Nick, you said you met, but obviously there's more to it. From a recruiter's point of view, literally, how did you meet?
So I don't know if we've ever met in person, Laurie. Everything.
We haven't. I can elaborate on our story a little bit if Vince doesn't mind. Yeah. So we used a couple of different recruiters when I was at Qualys. This was back before I think I was in charge of everything. I'm always going for world domination. And so this was back, I think, when I was over just the Northeast team, and I eventually was leading worldwide sales. And of everyone that I worked with, Nick was, and Nick's team was the recruiting firm that was bringing me the best matches, whether we ended up hiring or not, for what our needs were from a technical perspective, from a personality and like team matchup perspective. Nick knows that I hire a lot on who's going to fit in, who's going to have the right understanding of the mission and understanding of what we're here to do in addition to the technical and sales skills we're looking for. So I just kind of fell into a rhythm of always picking up the phone to call Nick when we were looking for a new hire. Then once I left Qualys, my first phone call when I was looking for a job myself was to Nick. And then as I moved to other companies and I was looking to hire, I would reach out to Nick's firm as well. So, and I'm currently working with Nick now as I've just left Veracode and I'm in transition, and his folks are helping me out. And much like he would bring me the right candidates, Nick's team has always brought me into opportunities that are a great fit. It's never a waste of time when I work with him and his team.
Vince, real quick, I'd like to add to that. So, Laurie, I totally forgot when we first started working with Laurie. She was over the Northeast at Qualys, and there was probably 4 or 5 folks that were in similar positions around the country. And during that time, Qualys had a need for a worldwide sales leader. And ever since I had worked with Laurie, I always thought everybody in the Qualys team was great, but Laurie was kind of a head above the rest. And so then it just so happened that that when that position came open, Laurie went into that role. She filled that role. And I think that's very challenging because now the people that were her peers were reporting to her. And I've done that before. And that's not always met with a lot of, excitement. And she did a really nice job of bridging the gap. I don't think anybody left through that transition, and she was able to increase performance. And every one of those people I still keep in touch with today, they have always talked about how great Laurie was in that position. So, anyways, just wanted to add that.
You guys have an incredibly great relationship that started, I'm assuming, with a phone call.
It did.
Unbelievable. Laurie, I want to go back to you just for a second, because whereas we're hearing how good your relationship is with Nick, you've dealt with other recruiters. Good, bad, doesn't make any difference. What do you look for from the viewpoint of the client? What do you look for in establishing a relationship with a recruiting firm?
So touching back on what I said with not only having candidates that meet the technical requirements, right? So, you have a job posting, you've got everything listed out, this skill, that skill, whatever. But having a recruiter that understands your leadership style, the personalities on your team, the culture of your company, who really takes the time to listen to everything that you have to say about what that right candidate with those skills who they are going to be, that's going to be that perfect match, is so meaningful. And that saves so much time when you're, looking at a pool out there of so many people that are always clamoring to get these elite roles, right? There's, we talk a lot about there's a 4 million person shortage of people who are technically qualified to handle protecting all of our data. And coming up in the future, I got an 18-year-old in the other room there. He's doing some online learning because his school's shut down right now. It was in the cybersecurity program. He's graduating this year out of high school. But there's still, when you open up a role, there's a lot of people throwing their hats in the ring. And to get that pared down to, say, a handful of candidates that are worth taking the time to really, go through that interview process, it's so really valuable to have a recruiter that understands that, whole holistic picture of what you're looking for. Because at the end of the day, when you hire someone in, it's kind of a gamble, right? It's a 50-50. You can only get so much out of a handful of interviews, maybe a panel presentation. So really matching up the right people and knowing that recruiter has taken the time to talk to that candidate, thoroughly vet them, and really get to know them. They've done that with you and they've made that connection is, just amazing. And Nick and his team are the type of firm that does that.
Well, clearly you've worked together for quite some time. And Nick, it's interesting. She talks about what I think is probably the key to success on both sides, and that is listening.
Absolutely.
And it's so hard for a salesperson, both of you know this, to shut up and listen. Nick, what do you look for in a client that tells you you want to trust and work with this person and pour your resources into working with this organization?
Well, as you touched on earlier, Vince, our industry is so incredibly competitive. Somebody like Laurie has recruiters calling her daily, multiple recruiters calling her daily saying, hey, I saw that you're hiring for this position, or I've got this candidate that I'm working with that I want to tell you about. And so once you have that relationship, the most important thing to me is that I've got to feel that they're invested in our processes, not as much, but at least to a point that we're invested. So when I say that, are they willing to run through candidates with you that you're bringing to the process and say, I like this about that candidate, I don't like this about this candidate, because that helps us refine our process and really laser focus on who the perfect fit is going to be. I have some clients that I've worked with in the past that'll say, hey, here's what we're working with. Here's my email address. Shoot me the resumes. I don't have time to meet with you. If I like them, I'll let you know, and then you just send resumes into this black hole and you never hear back. It's not successful. And that person is not going to be able to find the right fit for their position. That hiring manager has to identify a recruiter that they trust and that they think they can work with, and then invest some time into the process. Now, you're paying them to do the heavy lifting, to go through and interview the candidates and sell the position to them and vet out whether they're a fit. But can you invest 10 minutes a week into just running through the candidates and saying, you're missing here, you're doing great here, let's go this direction. And if you can find that, then you're going to be successful. I have never found a client that does the whole, hey, just send me the resumes and I'll get back to you when I see one I like. That never works.
And I assume that you're encouraged to walk away from those potential clients?
Absolutely. I mean, there's certain things that happen in the industry when it's more competitive or less competitive, or there's more positions out there. But if I have, 20, if my team's working on 20 searches at the time, here's the other thing too, Vince. My people are paid on commission. If they got 10 searches in front of them and they know that Laurie Haley's working on this search and she's invested in the process, and if I'm putting my time into finding candidates, Laurie's going to really look at these candidates and think about it and provide feedback. And I got number 10 on my list that I'm just sending resumes into a black hole. Where am I going to spend my time? Where do I think I can actually make money? I'm going to spend my time where the sales leader or the hiring manager is invested.
So, Laurie, leads me to an interesting question, because before you folks built your relationship together, it sounds like Nick came into this with an understanding of how he works. How did you adapt, or did you have to adapt to his process, or how did you make your process work with his process?
Well, it was a while back, and to be honest with you, I feel like Nick and I met at a time when I was developing in my role as a hiring manager. And in a way, I think that I learned a lot from the way that Nick and his group works, right? And probably could give him some credit around how I became what I consider a top-notch hiring manager myself, right? Learning to ask many of the right questions during the interview process and really take the time to look at a candidate the right way. There's another side to this too. We're talking a lot about me as a client, right? As a hiring manager, I've worked with Nick and am doing so right now as a client, as a candidate too. And there's an aspect to what he does that, where we're leaving out, which is he takes candidates and really talks them through, what is it you're looking for? How do you want to take your skills and apply those to the next step in your professional journey? Nick really helps a candidate to take what they've done in their career and figure out what's next and highlight what their strengths are and develop, the vision for where they need to go next. And that's part of his process in aligning them with the right next opportunity. And I learned a bit about that as, I was working with him as a hiring manager, and it's helped me tons as I've stepped through, the process of looking at other opportunities with him throughout, moving around in my career and such. And that's another great aspect of what they do as well.
Well, let's take just a little bit deeper dive into that without going into a big history. But I understand where you two learn to trust each other through you as a client. Clearly, he brought you quality people. The relationship grew. You wanted to work with him as you do a new search. What specifically, and this is going to get a little granular, and I'm okay with that. What specifically has helped you sit in the other chair across the desk in the specific interview? So as a candidate interviewing for a job, what has Nick, because you've sat on the other side of the desk forever, okay? And you've understood Nick from that point. And I understand that he's fed you with wanting to find out what your wants and desires. But the actual interview, what are some key helpful hints that he's helped you with in the actual interview for a job?
So I think there's been a lot of conversations, and I definitely, I don't know if Nick even maybe realizes how influential that he's been in along my path. As, I've called him up, probably 2 or 3 times. I haven't changed jobs too many times, but maybe 2 or 3 times, including this time, and had one of those, hey, I'm ready to make a move, or hey, I'm in the position to move. And he said, all right, let's talk about now let's look at where you've been, right? How do you want to take this? Where do you want to go? And he deep dives with me and talks me through. It's like a therapy session, right? and by doing that, he's helped me focus on the things that are important to point out. He helps me review those highlights in my resume, things like that. And then when I get into the interview process, that ends up being exactly what needs to be top of mind to put forth to the hiring managers that you're talking to, right? So it's all preparation for that next step. And that thorough vetting, that process that he goes through with his candidates is just all preparatory for that interview process, and it really puts your mind in the right space for what's next. And, in some cases, I almost feel like I was thinking I might want to do something else. And honestly, where I went with my last role, I had been in sales leadership for quite a while. And I talked to you about this, Nick, if you remember. And I was like, I feel a little stuck. I don't know if that's exactly what I want to do right now. I want to take that and maybe do something a little different, but am I stuck here? Can I get out of it? And Nick kind of helped me see that I could take that and move into a strategic B2B like alliances role, which is where I ended up with Vericode. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that that's something I could do with all of my skills. I didn't really see it that way, but with his experience in recruitment and all the placements he's done, he saw that skill set could be, redirected down that path. I really wouldn't have maybe seen that for myself.
So Nick, let me ask you one question before you carry on there, because we heard her take on how you prepared her. What I'd like you to do is give us a granulated look at preparing the candidate for the specific interview.
Sure.
Could you give us a snapshot of that?
Absolutely. So typically what we do is it's usually one conversation. It can be up to 2 before the candidate goes into the interview. We talk about all of the folks that are going to be in the process. So who are you meeting with tomorrow? What is our relationship with them? What do we know about them? What do we know about what they're looking for? But then we also go through, okay, once this conversation is completed, who's the next conversation going to be with, and who's the conversation after that? And we try to give them as much information we can as far as what our relationship is with those people and what our bounce is on those people, what our take is on those people, so that they're comfortable going into the conversation. I tell my people too, sometimes it's just as much as saying, hey, we know Laurie, and I'm going to use Laurie as the hiring manager in this example. We know Laurie. We know what she's looking for. She's already seen your profile. We've talked about you. She's excited to talk to you. Let me tell you what we think about Laurie. But just that little added extra kind of, okay, this is a warm conversation. I'm not going into it's not a cold call. I'm going into a warm conversation. That helps. And then we give them a detailed breakdown of what the hiring manager has said they're looking for and how their background aligns with that. So that, again, there's a comfort level. We have done vetting on our side to make sure that we think they're a good candidate in relation to conversations we've had with the hiring manager, but the candidate has not been privy to those conversations. So they don't know, sometimes they don't know why they're a good fit. And I'll tell you an example about Laurie and my time at Qualys, which is pretty interesting. But and then we'll go through the job description with them, and then we'll just give them kind of a real brief interview training session on, hey, here's some things you should think about. Here's some, you want to think about questions, you want to do research, you want to think about what are you going to say at the end of the interview, those sorts of things, so that when they go in, they feel like they've done some work. The other thing that this does too, Vince, is that when we set up these interview training sessions or interview preparation sessions, sometimes we'll have candidates that go, look, and I've talked about, the hiring manager and their dedication to the process. Sometimes the candidate will go, look, I'm busy. I don't have 30 minutes. And at that point we'll say, hey, look, we get it. If you're not interested in the role, no big deal. We'll tell you about the next one. But if they're not all in on that, then that tells us something, right? And so we don't want to waste the hiring manager's time with that interview. If you don't mind, I had one thing I wanted to hit on, and this is the story I was talking about at Qualys. We were talking about the hiring manager's process and how Laurie changed her process, or how we changed our process. When Laurie was at Qualys, they were looking for a very specific type of candidate that was a highly technical candidate that was interested in kind of moving into more of a sales-oriented role. Well, when I started with Laurie, and Laurie taught me something that we've added to our process since then. When I started with Laurie, we would start talking to these highly technical candidates, and you'd say, okay, let me tell you about a sales role. And they'd go, and I have no interest in a sales role, right? And so I would go to Laurie and I'd say, Laurie, this is the feedback we're getting. And she would say, no, you need to, explain it this way, talk about the role this way, talk about Qualys this way. And so we'd start having those conversations, and then we were getting the people that Laurie wanted to the conversation. Since then, one of the things we've done is we'll talk with the hiring manager. We'll go through kind of our intake call, but then we'll say, okay, here's how we're going to pitch it to the candidate. What are your thoughts? What would you change? What would you add? And by doing that, we've been able to get a much higher quality candidate, because we're hopefully speaking in the way that the hiring manager would about that position, about their company, and not in the way that a recruiter would, if that makes sense.
I think you just encapsulated the emphasis on listening.
Absolutely.
That's brilliant. Laurie, I dare say you might want to become a recruiter.
So Laurie and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
We'll leave that for another time.
That's because another podcast.
Yeah, the audience is going to tune into this and maybe we should hire Laurie.
more from a high level consultative standpoint. But yeah,
there you go. There you go. Love it. What would you say to Nick? What would you say to a new recruiting firm? Somebody that's trying to get into the business right now. What would you say they need to focus on first with dealing with candidates? Because that's how they're going to start in the business. They're going to have a candidate first. What's a piece of advice you would give to them?
I would say that if you have job searches that you're working on, don't lead with the job. So in other words, if you're calling a candidate and you say, hey, we just met, my name's Nick, I got this job, let me tell you about it. I want to see if you're qualified for it and if you're interested in it. That's not, again, in our industry, and Laurie can tell you this, it's so competitive that these people are getting calls all the time. And they're almost, when they hear a recruiter call them and say, hey, let me tell you about another job, it's kind of like, yeah, okay. I mean, I've had 50 of these conversations, and 49 of them were jobs that I have no interest in, or I'm not, it's not something that I would ever put in for. I think make sure that you're calling the candidate and having a conversation around what's your background, what are you looking for, what would you like to see in the next role, and then see if the positions that you're working on line up. And if they don't, you can go to market with that and try to find a position that lines up. But as long as you're taking that approach to it, I think you're going to be much more successful. And they're going to know, even if you don't have a job right then for them to put in for, they're going to know that you have their interests at heart and you're not just trying to make a placement.
Boy, that's brilliant. Now, Laurie, I would like you to, for a moment, take that seat that you had as a hiring manager. And Vince Holt calls you. I can predict what I can say that will turn you off right away and stop listening. What's a magic way to get your attention?
Probably, if Vince were going to call up and say, hey, listen, I've taken a look at your background as a successful sales leader. I've taken a look at XYZ company and its profile that you're currently working at. I've noticed that you've just achieved something around this, that. I see you've got some postings, whatever it may be, whatever the impetus for the phone call might be, right? If there is one, which would be a good thing. And, I really feel like, I could help to find the right candidates. I take a lot of time lining up candidates from a personality perspective, a technical perspective, a sales experience perspective. If you've got those kinds of, roles open, I feel like I can bring you the type of people that are going to be a match all the way around, really throwing it right out there that you've got the ability to give me that full picture in a candidate. That's what, I'm looking for. And, that goes along with like what Nick said. I just had a message in my inbox this morning. Hey, I got this role. It's XYZ. And I was like, hey, did you look at my LinkedIn profile? I would never want that role. I'd rather poke myself in the eye. But, and it was just one of those, like you gotta, putting in that work before you make that call where you've looked at not just the company profile for that person's background, right? The whole thing before you approach that hiring manager and give them that kind of pitch. Not, hey, I've got these 3 candidates. I get a lot of those. And I have an inbox full of them. My old inbox at Vericoat that I just left, an inbox full of them. Hey, I got so-and-so. Hey, I got so-and-so. That doesn't do it for me. What does it for me is I can bring you what you need based on what I'm seeing, who you are and who your company is. That's a different conversation.
So one of the things that I believe you're saying is, don't call me with, I got a guy. Call me with, how's this person going to make me money?
Yeah. If you haven't spoken to me yet, you probably don't have my guy. That's my advice. You gotta get me on the phone and do your research. You could probably get pretty close to having the guy, but if you haven't spoken to me yet, you'd be pretty lucky to have my.
I'm going to do a little deeper dive, and I apologize because we make cold calls.
Sure.
And to your point, we should make sure we know who we're calling. But you and I have never talked. And by the way, I don't work in your industry, so this isn't trying to bait the hook. But you and I have never talked. In the Reader's Digest form, encapsulate it. What could I say to you at your last job, cold calling you as a recruiter? What could I say to you in a voicemail that would cause you to call me back?
The things I just mentioned. I've seen your history. You've had successes at these companies. You've got this background. Vericode, I know it does this, it does that. I've got someone who shares a similar background, who has experience in those areas. Let's have a conversation demonstrating that expertise. Just saying, hey, I've got a guy who knows what you do isn't as appealing.
And I think too, if you think of salespeople in general, they got a list of 50 people in front of them. They're trying to get through their list of 50, and they're just calling. And as Laurie's saying, they're saying, I got a guy, I got a guy, I got a guy. And all of a sudden somebody picks up the phone. They're like, oh no.
So Nick just said something interesting, right? He said salesperson. I'm a salesperson, right? So much like I'm going to call up a prospect, I'm not just going to call up a prospect and say, hey, I got application security testing. Do you want some? I'm going to go out. I am going to Google the company. I am going to Google that. Say I'm calling the CISO. That's our typical customer in application security. I'm going to look up the CISO. He was at a golf tournament last weekend. He's got 2 kids. He loves Mustangs. I have a Mustang. Their company just had a breach, whatever. I'm going to send him an email that says, hey, Joe, how's it going? I saw your company just had a breach. That's terrible. We offer these kinds of services. Maybe some of your solutions are under review. Maybe I'll throw in some context. I have a Mustang. Noticed you have that too. Like, you throw in all of that work that captures someone's attention. That shows that you have the information, more of that information that they want to hear more of, not just, I have application security testing. So do all my competitors, right? Like, coming to the table with some of that work.
You're trying to bring some value to the conversation, right, Laurie?
Exactly. And I'm a salesperson, right? So unfortunately for you guys as recruiters, we're a tough audience. It's like when I go to buy a car, it's tough for those guys to sell me a car because I'm a salesperson. You're selling to a salesperson. And that's essentially kind of the same relationship. You guys are when you're dealing with sales leaders, selling to salespeople. So you got to come with game because it's the same game.
Anything to add, Nick?
I think I hear what Laurie is saying because I get those. So as I was saying before, if you're calling 50 people and you're just calling over and over and you're just going through a list, somebody like Laurie knows. I've even when I was early in my career as a salesperson, I've had sales leaders kind of challenge me on that, like, oh, what number are you on your list? Obviously you're just running through a list. You don't know anything about me. I think sometimes, and it's hard for us to do as salespeople, but sometimes just slowing down and taking a minute and doing some research and what can I bring to this person that they haven't heard from the other 20 recruiters that have called them today? What kind of value can I bring to the conversation? How can I show my expertise? Because Laurie gets calls all the time from people that just want to make a placement and get their fee and then get out of there. What she's looking for is somebody that is going to have a relationship and make her business better and have her back in the people that they bring and in her next move in her career, and really try to help in those ways and not just try to get a fee and get out of there. And so some way you got to find a way to differentiate yourself. And I think I agree with Laurie, showing that you have dug in a little bit and know a little bit about them before you're calling shows that you're invested and you're not just trying to, get your next client and check the box and move on to the next one.
But much like any excellent salesperson, Nick and his group really know their prospect list, right? The groups of people that they're trying to place with very well. And that's what someone who's a really good salesperson, they focus on a certain group of prospects and they get to know them very well. So when they're bringing candidates to them, that work is sort of already done. And they already know who, when they go to different companies, they know a lot about those companies because they've studied them. So it's not just throwing things at a wall to see what sticks.
Yeah. So to wrap it up, what you're saying is know your product and know your buyer.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful. You guys, I got to tell you something. This was a new adventure for me, having you both on here, having a recruiter, having a client, and a candidate. What a fascinating opportunity for our audience to tune in. I hope they pay attention clear to the end, because you both wrap this up to the real value of what we all do. And I want to thank you both for taking the time, trusting me, trusting each other. I mean, you two have a relationship that I'm telling you, every recruiter out there would love to have. And I thank you very, very much, both of you.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for having me, Vince.